Let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question before you answer it. Why do you feel guilty? You did not cheat. You didn't lie. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to be cruel for fun. You didn't gaslight someone, manipulate someone, or make someone question their own sanity just to win an argument. You weren't the one who threw words like weapons. You weren't the one who made promises like decorations, beautiful, meaningless, disposable. They did all of that to you, and yet, here you are. Maybe it's 2 a.m. in the morning. Maybe you're scrolling through their old photos. Maybe you've typed and deleted the same text message 17 times. Maybe you cried in your car after work today, and you don't even know why, except that you do know why. You just can't bring yourself to say it out loud. You feel guilty for leaving, for choosing yourself, for walking away from someone who broke you, and somehow that guilt feels heavier than all the pain they ever caused you. This video is for you, not the version of you that pretends to be okay, not the version of you that says, I'm fine, I moved on. I'm talking to the version of you that is alone right now, feeling a guilt so confusing, so suffocating, so deeply irrational that it makes you wonder if maybe you're the problem. You are not the problem, but by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why your brain and your heart are doing this to you, and, more importantly, what you can do about it. Stay with me, because this will change the way you see yourself. Let's start with the paradox here, because what you're feeling right now is a paradox, and naming it is the first step to understanding it. You were in a romantic, familial, or a friendship, whatever form it took, with someone who hurt you. Maybe they were emotionally abusive. Maybe they were a narcissist. Maybe they were just deeply broken in ways that made it impossible for them to love you safely. Maybe they weren't even malicious. Maybe they were just painfully, catastrophically wrong for you, and the damage happened slowly, quietly, like water eroding stone. You stayed for as long as you could. You tried. God, you tried. You forgave things that probably shouldn't have been forgiven. You made excuses for behavior that needed to be confronted. You bent yourself into shapes that weren't yours, adjusted your personality, your boundaries, your dreams, all in service of keeping the peace, keeping the connection, keeping them. And then, one day, something inside you broke open. Not broke down, broke open, like a dam finally giving way. And you made a decision. You left, and that should have been the end of the story. You walked away from the fire. You should feel relieved, but you don't feel relief. Or maybe you do just for a moment, and then, almost immediately, riding right behind that relief like a wave crashing onto shore, comes the guilt. Crushing, consuming, relentless guilt. How is that possible? How can you feel guilty for leaving someone who made you feel small, invisible, crazy, worthless, exhausted, unloved, and unseen? Here is the answer. Because guilt is not a compass for what is right. Guilt is a signal that something feels wrong. And those are two completely different things. Read that again. Write it down if you have to. Guilt does not tell you what is morally correct. Guilt tells you that something in your experience deviates from what you were conditioned to believe was your role, your duty, or your identity. You were conditioned by them, by the relationship, possibly by your entire childhood, to believe that your role was to hold this person together, to be the steady hand. The patient is one, the one who understands, the one who stays, and leaving violated that conditioning. That's why it hurts. Not because leaving was wrong, but because leaving broke the invisible contract that was written for you without your consent, long before you even understood what was happening. There is a term in psychology that I want to introduce to you, and I want you to really understand it, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Because once you understand this, a lot of what you're feeling will start to make sense. It's called trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is what happens when you form a deep, powerful, almost magnetic emotional attachment to someone who intermittently hurts you. Notice I said intermittently. That's the key word. Not constantly, intermittently. Because here's the thing. If someone were cruel to you 100% of the time, leaving would be simple. You'd leave. Done. But that's not how it works with people who hurt us. They don't hurt us all the time. They hurt us sometimes. And in between the painful moments, they give us something that feels like gold. They give us moments of connection so beautiful that they take your breath away. Moments of tenderness that make you think, this is who they really are. Maybe the darkness is the exception. Maybe the warmth is the truth. Those moments, the laughter, the intimacy, the feeling of being completely known and completely chosen, those moments become the reward your brain is chasing. This isn't a romantic metaphor. This is neuroscience. When you experience unpredictable cycles of pain followed by reward, your brain releases dopamine, the neurochemical associated with motivation, craving, and pursuit, in patterns that are almost identical to addiction. Researchers have compared the neurological profile of a trauma-bonded person to that of someone addicted to a substance. The pain and reward cycle doesn't just bond you to the person. It makes the bond stronger than a healthy, consistent relationship would, because your nervous system has been trained to work harder, hope more intensely, and hold on more desperately in pursuit of those moments of warmth. This is why you stayed longer than you should have. And this is a huge part of why leaving feels like ripping yourself in two. Because on a neurological level, leaving them is not just walking away from a person. It's walking away from the source of the only relief your nervous system has learned to recognize. Your brain doesn't care that the relief was manufactured. Your brain doesn't care that the warmth was inconsistent. Your brain has a pattern locked in. This person equals the end of the pain, even though they were also the source of the pain. Let that sink in. You're not weak for being trauma bonded. You're not stupid. You're not pathetic. You are a human being with a nervous system that was doing exactly what nervous systems do, adapting to its environment to survive. But surviving isn't the same as living, and the bond that helped you survive the relationship is now making it brutally hard to survive leaving it. The guilt you feel is, in part, your nervous system screaming that you have cut off access to its primary coping mechanism. It's withdrawal, and withdrawals are hard. They are supposed to be hard, but they end. Now I want to talk about something that might be uncomfortable to hear. Not because it's your fault. It is not your fault, but because understanding it will free you. Most people who end up in relationships with people who hurt them share a particular emotional profile. Psychologists have given it many names: highly empathic, codependent, anxiously attached, but I want to describe it in plain language. You are probably someone who learned very early in life that your value was tied to how well you could manage other people's emotions. Maybe you grew up in a home where one parent was unpredictable, where the emotional temperature of the household was set by someone else's mood, and your job was to read that mood, adapt to it, soothe it, and manage it. Maybe you were the child who kept the peace at the dinner table. Maybe you were the teenager who became the emotional support system for a parent who should have been the emotional support for you. Or maybe it wasn't that dramatic. Maybe it was subtler. Maybe you simply learned that being good, being agreeable, being helpful, being the one who never caused problems, earned your love. And causing problems, having needs, expressing boundaries, saying, actually, that hurt me, cost you love. Whatever form it took, you came into adulthood having internalized this belief. It is my job to hold other people together. And if I fail at that, I am failing at love itself. Now enter this person. This person who needed to be held together more than anyone you'd ever met. This person who pulled something out of you, a depth of compassion, a fierce protectiveness, a desire to be the one who finally made them feel safe that you'd never felt before. You didn't know it at the time, but you had found the perfect stage for the role you'd spent your whole life rehearsing, and you played it beautifully. You gave everything. You poured yourself out. And when they hurt you because they did, and they kept doing it, you didn't leave. You stayed. Because in some part of your mind, leaving felt like failure, like abandonment, like confirming their deepest fear that they were unlovable. And you couldn't do that to them. You couldn't. Because you had made their pain your responsibility. So, when you finally left, what happened? You felt like you had abandoned a wounded child. I want to be extremely careful here, because this is where things get nuanced. The person who hurt you may have had real wounds, real trauma, real pain. That can be true. Their brokenness can be real, and what they did to you can also be unacceptable. Both things can be true simultaneously. But here is what you need to understand. Other people's wounds are not yours to bleed for. Compassion does not require self-destruction. You can care deeply about someone's pain and still refuse to be the vessel it's poured into. You are not abandoning a wounded person by leaving. You are refusing to be wounded further. And the guilt that tells you otherwise? That guilt was installed in you a long time ago. It is not the truth. It is a program that needs to be examined, challenged, and gradually, compassionately rewritten. Here is something that complicates your guilt enormously, and I think it's important to talk about it directly. They weren't monsters, at least not all the time, maybe not even most of the time. And that is one of the most disorienting things about leaving someone who hurt you, because when people find out you left, there's often a silent expectation that the story should be simple. They were terrible, you were good, you got out, the end. But your story isn't simple, is it? Because you remember the version of them that made you laugh until your stomach hurt. You remember the night they held you while you cried. You remember the inside jokes, the way they looked at you sometimes, the moments that felt like home. You remember the person they were in their best days, and you loved that person. You love that person still. And here's what your guilt latches onto. You left that person too. When you walked away from the relationship, you walked away from both versions of them, the one that broke you and the one that occasionally made you feel whole. And your heart, being the generous, compassionate, complicated thing that it is, mourns the good version. This is not a weakness. This is love. Complicated, complicated love. But here is what you need to understand. You are not guilty of anything for mourning the good parts. You're also not obligated to stay in a relationship because the good parts existed. A relationship cannot be evaluated only at its peaks. A relationship must be evaluated in full, including the valleys, the patterns, and the moments when you felt most alone in the room with them. The person who hurt you is not two separate people. They are one person capable of warmth and capable of harm, and you experienced both. You are not abandoning the good version by leaving. You are protecting yourself from the version that caused damage. And if they are truly capable of change and growth, that change will not happen because you stayed and absorbed the damage. More often than not, and the research on this is fairly consistent, change happens when the person is faced with the real and permanent consequences of their behavior. Your leaving may be the most honest thing you've ever done for them. But even if it isn't, even if they never change, you still had the right to go. Your right to safety, to peace, to a life that doesn't require you to brace for impact every day. That right does not depend on what they do next. It is unconditional. Now I want to go deeper, because I think it's not enough to understand why you feel guilty. I think you need to understand what that guilt is doing for you, because guilt, as painful as it is not random. It is serving a function. And until you understand the function, it's very hard to release it. Guilt, at its psychological core, is a control mechanism. That's not an insult. It's a description. Guilt gives us the feeling, however illusory, that we are in control of an outcome that terrifies us. Think about it this way. If you allow yourself to believe that leaving was the right thing, the necessary, justified, healthy thing, then you also have to sit with the reality that you couldn't fix what was broken, that you tried and it wasn't enough, and you had to go. And underneath that reality is something even harder. The relationship was fundamentally unsafe, and you spent years in it. Sitting with all of that is painful. It raises questions about your own judgment. It raises grief, real, profound grief for the time you lost, for the future you imagined, for the person you thought they were. Guilt, paradoxically, protects you from all of that. Because if you're guilty, if the leaving was wrong, if you hurt them, if maybe you should go back, then the story isn't over. You haven't lost anything permanently. You're still in the narrative. You still have power over the outcome. Maybe if you apologize, if you return, if you try just one more time. Do you see what's happening? The guilt is keeping the door open. Because walking fully through that door and closing it behind you means accepting a grief that feels unsurvivable. It is survivable. I promise you, it is survivable. But the guilt is lying to you, telling you that grief will destroy you. And so it keeps you hovering, guilty, uncertain, half in and half out, because that feels safer than the finality of grief. There's another function of guilt that I want to name, and this one is even more subtle. Guilt keeps you focused on them, on their well-being, their reaction, their pain at your absence. And as long as you are focused on them, you don't have to focus on yourself. You don't have to ask, who am I outside of this relationship? You don't have to face, what does my life look like now? What do I want? What do I need? Those are enormous questions, terrifying questions, for someone who has spent months or years defining themselves through the lens of another person's needs. Guilt, strangely, is the more comfortable option because it is familiar. It feels like still being in the relationship, still being needed, still having a defined role. But you are more than a role. You are more than what you provided for someone else. The grief and the identity rebuilding that waits on the other side of guilt is where your real life begins. Let's talk about the world around you, because your guilt doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has been fed and reinforced by the stories our culture talks about love. We are steeped in a narrative about love that says, real love stays, real love is unconditional, real love endures hardship. If you truly love someone, you work through it, you fight for it, you don't give up, and there is truth in that. Relationships require commitment and resilience. Growth is uncomfortable. Healthy conflict is part of intimacy. I'm not dismissing that. But here's what that narrative leaves out. Those principles apply to healthy relationships. They apply to relationships where both people are fundamentally committed to each other's dignity. They do not apply and were never meant to apply to relationships where one person is consistently chipping away at the other's sense of self. Fighting for love should never mean fighting to be treated like a human being. Being unconditional should never mean accepting conditions that erode your mental health. Real love stays should never mean staying somewhere that is breaking you apart. But the scripts don't make that distinction clearly enough. And so, when you leave, a voice inside you, a voice that sounds like every romantic movie, every piece of advice that told you don't give up, every cultural message about the nobility of endurance, that voice tells you that you failed, that you weren't strong enough, that you should have loved better. And sometimes the people in your life reinforce this. Maybe someone said, but you guys were so good together. Maybe someone asked, are you sure you tried everything? Maybe someone with the best intentions reminded you of their good qualities, as if you had somehow forgotten them. These comments, however well-meaning, plant seeds of doubt, and doubt waters guilt. I want you to hear something clearly. Leaving a relationship that was hurting you is not a failure of love. It is one of the most loving things you can do for yourself, and yes, even for the person you left, because a relationship held together by one person's sacrifice is not a relationship. It is a hostage situation. You are not a hostage to love, and you are not a failure for refusing to be. We need to talk about grief, because I think one of the reasons guilt looms so large is that it is sitting on top of grief that hasn't been properly acknowledged. When you leave a relationship, even one that was causing you damage, you are not just leaving a person, you are leaving a version of the future you had imagined. You are leaving the person you hoped they would become. You are leaving the relationship you thought you were in for a while, before you understood what was really happening. That is a profound loss, and it deserves to be grieved, not just privately, not just in stolen moments in the car or at 2 a.m., but genuinely, fully, with the same weight and dignity you'd give any other significant loss. The guilt often arrives first, because grief is harder to look at. Guilt has an object it points outward, toward them, toward the decision to leave. But grief turns inward. Grief asks you to sit with your own pain, your own loss, your own shattered expectations, and that can feel incredibly vulnerable, especially if you're someone who has spent a long time being the strong one, the caretaker, the one who manages everyone else's feelings. So instead of grieving, the mind offers guilt as a proxy, a way to feel something without collapsing fully into the tenderness of loss. But grief, when it is honored and allowed, moves through you. Guilt, when it is suppressed and unfed, becomes a permanent resident. So, I want to permit you, if you need someone, to permit you to grieve, to mourn the relationship not just for what it was, but for what it could have been, what you wanted it to be, what you deserved it to be, to cry for the version of them you loved, to grieve the time, to grieve the plans, to grieve the person you were when you walked into that relationship before it changed you. This grief is not weakness. There is no evidence that you made the wrong decision. It is evidence that you loved, that you were present, that you gave something of yourself that mattered. The grief honors the investment. It does not obligate the return. You can mourn something and still know in your bones that leaving it was right. Let's talk about what happens in your mind after you leave. Because if you're anything like the people who have written to me, your mind does not rest. It loops. Endlessly, exhaustingly loops. Did I give it enough chance? Was I too harsh? Maybe if I had done this differently, maybe they'll change now. Maybe I should reach out. Maybe I'm the one who made them this way. Maybe they're suffering. Maybe they're fine. Maybe they never cared. Maybe they cared too much. Maybe. This is called rumination, and it is one of the most common and most tormenting features of leaving a difficult relationship. Here's what's happening neurologically. Your brain is a meaning-making machine. When something painful happens, especially something as significant as the end of an important relationship, your brain goes into a kind of forensic overdrive. It replays the events, re-examines the evidence, and looks for alternative conclusions. It is, in its own way, trying to make sense of what happened so that it can learn, adapt, and protect you in the future. But the problem is that rumination doesn't lead to resolution, it leads to more rumination, because the questions it's asking don't have clean answers. The relationship was complex. The person was complex. You were complex. The reasons for leaving were valid, but layered. There is no single tidy narrative that explains everything, and so the mind keeps searching for one and keeps coming up empty, and keeps searching again. And guilt is the fuel of rumination. Every guilty thought generates a question, and every question generates another guilty thought, and the loop continues. So how do you break the loop? The first thing to understand is that you cannot think your way out of rumination. Trying to use logic to resolve a guilt loop is like trying to put out a fire with more fuel. You just give the rumination more material to work with. What actually helps, and the research on this is detailed, is interruption followed by intentional redirection. An interruption means something that breaks the loop. Physical movement, a cold shower, a specific phrase you've decided in advance to say to yourself, I have thought about this enough for today. not suppression, not "I refuse to feel this," but a deliberate, gentle boundary around the rumination. Intentional redirection means consciously moving towards something that engages you in the present, not because the past doesn't matter, but because you cannot live there. The past is information, not a home, and gradually, not all at once, but gradually the loops get shorter. The guilt visits less frequently. The questions don't carry the same urgency, because you are building, however slowly, a new relationship with the present, with yourself, with a life that is yours. I need to speak to something that I think is critically important, and I want to be careful not to demonize, but to be honest. In many of the most painful relationships, guilt is not something that arises purely from within. It is something that is intentionally or unintentionally cultivated by the other person. Some people, particularly those with narcissistic traits or a pattern of emotional manipulation, become extraordinarily skilled at triggering your guilt when they sense you pulling away. They may cry in ways that seem calculated to stop you. They may make veiled or direct threats about what will happen if you leave. They may remind you of everything they've done for you, everything they've sacrificed, everything they're going through right in the moment when you are trying to think clearly about your own well-being. They may tell you that you are selfish, that you are abandoning them, that no one will ever love them the way you do, that they will fall apart without you. And if you are a compassionate person, if you are the kind of person who has always felt other people's pain almost as acutely as your own, these words land like arrows. They find the wound, because they have been studying the wound for a very long time. This is not love. This is leverage, and recognizing it as leverage does not mean they weren't also in real pain. Both can be true. But using your empathy to keep you in a situation that damages you, consciously or not, is a form of control, and you do not owe anyone your suffering as the price of their peace. I also want to speak to a slightly different version of this, one that is less dramatic, but equally powerful. Sometimes no one weaponizes your empathy actively. You do it to yourself, because you are so attuned to their pain that you imagine their suffering in such vivid detail. You picture them alone, devastated, unable to cope, and that image is so painful to you that guilt rushes in as a response to your own imagination. You are not responsible for the images your empathic mind generates. You are not responsible for managing someone else's response to a decision you had every right to make. You cannot sacrifice your mental health on the altar of a hypothetical scenario that may not even reflect reality. And even if it does reflect reality, even if they are struggling, your presence was not the solution. Because presence under these conditions doesn't heal. It enables, and enabling someone to continue hurting you is not love, it is quite martyrdom. You deserve more than martyrdom. Now I want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in conversations, about leaving difficult relationships, something that might be at the root of your guilt in a way that isn't immediately obvious. Many people who leave feel guilty not just about the other person, but about themselves, because somewhere in the relationship, gradually, almost imperceptibly, they lost track of who they were. You gave so much. You adjusted so much. You made yourself smaller to make the relationship possible. And by the time you left, you may have looked in the mirror and not fully recognized the person looking back at you. And that is terrifying. Because if you don't know who you are outside of that relationship, then the question of what comes next feels unanswerable. Guilt, in this case, becomes an anchor. It keeps you tethered to the relationship, even after you've physically left, because at least in the relationship, you knew your role. You knew what was expected. You knew who you were, the partner, the fixer, the one who stayed. Without that role, there is a vast, open, uncertain landscape of self waiting to be explored, and it is both terrifying and necessary. Here's what I want you to know about identity reconstruction after a painful relationship. It is not a return. It is a beginning. You cannot go back to the person you were before. That person walked into this relationship without knowing what you know now. They didn't understand their patterns, their wounds, their needs as clearly as you, however painfully you understand them now. The person on the other side of this is not the you before, they are the you after. And the you after is wiser, with more boundaries, more honest with themselves, and even though it doesn't feel this way right now, more capable of receiving genuine love. But that person needs to be built, brick by brick, day by day. It starts with small things. Noticing what brings you joy when no one's watching. Letting yourself have preferences. Saying no to things without immediately justifying it. Choosing how you spend your own time, your own energy, your own attention, not in service of someone else's needs, but in response to your own. It involves, inevitably, some therapy. Not because you're not broken, but because you have been through something significant, and having a skilled, caring person to help you process it is a gift you deserve to give yourself. It involves community, connection, remembering that you are not meant to carry all of this alone, and it involves patience, profound, uncomfortable patience. Because identity doesn't rebuild overnight, but it does rebuild. I have seen it, I have lived it. It rebuilds. There is a double guilt that lives in the hearts of many people who have left painful relationships, and I want to name it explicitly because it can feel very lonely and very confusing. The first guilt is the one we've been discussing. Guilt for leaving, but there's a second guilt running parallel to it, and it goes like this. Why did I stay so long? Why did it take me this long to leave? Why did I make so many excuses? Why did I let them treat me that way again and again? Why didn't I see it sooner? Why didn't I love myself enough to go? If you are carrying this second guilt alongside the first, you are dealing with a double burden that most people don't fully acknowledge. And it can compound the first guilt in strange ways. Because if you feel ashamed of staying, you may unconsciously minimize what you went through, which makes the leaving feel less justified, which intensifies the guilt about leaving. It becomes a guilt spiral, and it is brutal. So, I want to address both guilts directly. You stayed as long as you did because you were doing the best you could with what you understood at the time. You stayed because you loved someone, and love is not a switch you flip off when someone hurts you. You stayed because the trauma bond was powerful. You stayed because you believed it could get better. You stayed because leaving felt more terrifying than enduring. None of that is pathetic. All of it is profoundly human. And you left when you left because that was when you were ready, or when the pain finally exceeded the fear, or when something inside you reached its limit. There is no right time to leave a painful relationship. It is only when you can, and you were able. You did it. Forgive yourself for staying. Forgive yourself for leaving. You were trying to love and to survive simultaneously, and that is one of the hardest things a human being can do. I want to be honest with you about healing, because I think there is a version of healing content out there that is too clean, too tidy, too linear. It says things like, 40 days and you'll be over it, or just follow these 5 steps, or once you understand the narcissist, you'll be free. Understanding helps. It genuinely does. That's why I've spent this entire video trying to help you understand. But understanding is the beginning of healing, not the completion of it. Real healing is not linear. It moves in waves. There will be days when you feel genuinely free, light, clear, almost surprised by your own comfort. And there will be days often triggered by something small and seemingly insignificant. A song, a smell, a stranger with a similar laugh, when the grief and the guilt rush back, and it feels like you haven't moved at all. You have moved. Those difficult days are not evidence of regression. They are part of the process. The waves get smaller over time. The good days get longer. The difficult days lose their power to completely overtake you. But it takes time. It takes more time than you expect. It takes more compassion towards yourself than you probably feel natural or comfortable. What healing actually looks like, in my experience, is this. It looks like one morning waking up and realizing you didn't think about them first thing, just for a moment. But it happened. It looks like making a decision about something small, what to eat, what to watch, where to go on a Saturday, and realizing you made it based entirely on what you wanted without calculating how it would affect someone else. It looks like setting a boundary with someone new, someone completely unrelated to your past, and not collapsing with anxiety afterward. It looks like a day when the guilt visits, and you greet it differently. Not with panic, not with surrender, but with something closer to, I know what you are. You're not the truth. You're old programming. Thank you for trying to protect me, but I don't need you to do this anymore. It looks, eventually, like meeting someone, maybe a new friend, maybe a therapist, maybe a stranger at a coffee shop, and realizing that you can be in a conversation without managing their feelings or dimming your own. It looks like you. Finally, tentatively, beautifully yourself. I want to give you something practical to take away from this, because I know that understanding something intellectually doesn't always make it easier when you're in the thick of a hard night. So here is a script, not a perfect one. Feelings don't respond to perfect scripts, but something to anchor you when the guilt arrives. When the guilt comes, try this. Step 1. Name it out loud. I am feeling guilty, not I was wrong. Just, I am feeling guilty, because guilt is a feeling, not a verdict. Step 2. Acknowledge the feeling without obeying it. This feeling makes sense given what I've been through. My nervous system learned to feel responsible for this person. The guilt is my old programming showing up. Step 3. Remind yourself of the truth. Leaving was not easy. It was hard. It was the hardest thing I've done. That tells me something. It tells me I cared. I am not a villain. I am a person who loved someone and was also hurt by them, and I made the decision to protect myself. That decision was mine to make. It was right. Step 4. Choose to return to the present. Right now, in this moment, I am safe. I am here. My life is mine. I am building something for myself. You will not say this once and have the guilt disappear. You may say it 100 times, but each time you say it, you are reinforcing new neural pathways, new beliefs about yourself, your worthiness, and your right to have made this decision. The brain changes. Slowly, incrementally, genuinely, it changes, and you can guide that change. I want to close this video by speaking directly to you, not as a content creator, not as someone with information to share, just as a person who understands or is trying to understand what you are carrying. You loved someone. You really loved them. And somewhere along the way, that love became something that cost you more than love should ever cost. It cost you your sense of self, your peace, your confidence in your own perceptions, your belief that you deserve to be treated with care. And you stayed through it, because that is what love told you to do, until staying became impossible, until the cost became too high, until some small, stubborn part of you, some part of you that refused to be completely extinguished, said, enough. You listened to that voice. You left. And now the guilt is trying to tell you that the voice was wrong. The guilt is not right. You are not a bad person for leaving someone who hurt you. You are not a coward for protecting yourself. You are not cruel for choosing your own well-being. You are not selfish for finally putting yourself first after putting someone else first for so long. You are brave, braver than you probably feel right now, because leaving what is familiar, even when it is painful, even when it has become dangerous to your spirit, takes a kind of courage that most people cannot fully appreciate unless they have done it themselves. The guilt will be loud for a while. Let it be loud. Don't fight it. Don't collapse into it. Just let it exist. Knowing that it is not the truth of you. The truth about you is that you are someone who loves deeply, someone who gives generously, someone who tried harder than you probably should have, for longer than you probably should have, because you believed in the possibility of something beautiful. That capacity that loves, that hope, that generosity is not the problem. It is your gift. What needs to change is where you direct it. Direct it towards yourself for a while. Give yourself the care, the patience, the compassion that you gave so freely to someone who couldn't return it. You deserve to be loved in a way that does not require your suffering. You deserve to be in a relationship where you don't have to brace for impact. You deserve mornings that feel calm instead of anxious. You deserve to know what it feels like to be chosen consistently, not intermittently. You deserve peace. And peace begins the moment you decide not once, but every day that your guilt is a visitor, not a verdict. That the decision you made was an act of love toward yourself, and that you will honor it. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but with the same loyalty and commitment you gave to that relationship, now redirected toward the only relationship that will last your entire life, the one you have with yourself. If any part of this video resonated with you, if something in here named something you've been feeling but couldn't find the words for, please let me know in the comments. Not to cause pain for anyone, not because you owe it to me, but because sometimes writing it down, even to a stranger on the internet, is the first step in releasing it. You are not alone in this. The comments section below tells me that every single week, if you're still in a relationship that is hurting you and you're trying to find the strength to leave or make sense of what's happening, there are resources linked in the description. Please use them. If this video helped you, please consider sharing it. Not for me, for the person in your life who is sitting alone right now, feeling a guilt they can't explain, feeling broken by something they should be relieved to be free of. Send it to them. It might be the thing they needed to hear today. And if you're new here, welcome. We talk about the hard stuff on this channel. We talk about the things that are difficult to say out loud. We talk about healing not as a destination, but as a daily, imperfect, deeply human practice. Hit subscribe if that sounds like something you need more of in your life. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself. You earned it.